Good evening，大家晚上好，我是吉米严，欢迎来到这个老黄的节目，我们这个关于温哥华市选的特别节目。今天我们请到了一位很重要的这个嘉宾，也是这次市选中间温哥华学务委员的候选人，Christopher Richardson，Richardson 李查森先生，然后他其实也有一个中文名字叫李济富。That's the Chinese name, Li Jifu. So, hi, Mr. Richardson.
Hi there, and hello, the audience.
Yes. 李继富先生呢，是之前呢，因为担任过温哥华市的公园局的主席，也是公园局的这个委员，后来又其实担任过温哥华这个市里面的这个学校局的主席，也之前其实是在学校局担任过的这样的一个选举的公职的职位。那么现在呢，又再一次呢，这个在2018年参选之后呢，2022年继续披挂上阵。所以呢，我们来了解一下这个李继富先生为什么这个常年从事这样的工作然后还有那么大的激情来参与到公共服务中间。So, Mr. Richardson, maybe you can give us a little bit introduction about yourself, and then I'll do the interpretation in Chinese, so the audience in Vancouver, in British Columbia, then they can learn more about and you have a very rich history serving the public, serving the community.
Well, thank you, Jimmy. I'm very pleased. I'm a fourth generation Vancouverite. My great-grandfather, and there's a political involvement, he was an alderman in Ward number 5, which before 1936, we had wards. And so my parents grew up in the East End of Vancouver on Franklin Street. And I came along when my father was just completing a doctorate at MIT. So I then spent some time in Nova Scotia and then moved to Toronto. And we have eventually arrived in grade 5 in Vancouver. And I've lived here ever since. I'm a chartered accountant, or a chartered professional accountant by profession. And my specialty at Price Waterhouse was personal tax. But I always had an interest in the community and the charitable field. So I went out on my own to work with various charities along the way. And along that, you then get involved in the community, which brought me to be involved as a founder of a community association, Southeast Vancouver, that eventually drew me to run for civic office. And I had the pleasure and the honor of being a park commissioner on 3 occasions. And then in 2014, and I think it's pivotal that I have 2 sons, 2 lovely boys, and a wife who's a nurse in the downtown east side. But one of my sons was on the gifted side of the spectrum, and the idea was to keep him motivated and involved, and he's an engineer. But the other child, my younger son, struggled and had a learning difference, a difficulty, which the public school system was unable to address. And that prompted me and a challenge by actually Kirk LaPointe, who said, you can run for park board again, but why? How about school board? So in 2014, I ran, and it was because of the inability of the system to deal with my son's dyslexia. And I was pleased and proud that I won and actually became the chair in 2014. But that was a very tumultuous time of the school board, concerns about budgeting, which, I don't think are behind us in terms of school closures, in terms of programs. And that term lasted 2 years. And that brings us to today, when I'm 10 courses into a master's in special education, inclusive education. And I'm hoping to now become elected again at the school board to enable me to kind of maybe address some of the shortfalls that the board is facing in terms of dealing with those vulnerable or unique learners that the standard system does not address. So that's just basically me, in that's 67 years of commitment to the community. I guess the last thing I should mention is that I have been a reserve constable with the city of Vancouver for the last 49 and a bit years.
Yes.
Anyways, that's it.
That's monumental. Yeah. And then we'll get back to that because I want to provide the audience a quote and from the article. And I think the current police chief said he joined the police force in 1983 in the age of 19, right? Served all the way, promoted to the chief at the age of 51. And but he actually knew you from day one and all the way, for the 30 years or something. And so this is really amazing, like your community service. So let me do the interpretation. And so we have a much better and more comprehensive understanding of Mr. Richardson. 李嘉诚先生啊，就是李继富先生，他是4代的加拿大人，然后呢，这个在东区温哥华的东区成长。那目前呢，他一直都是一个注册会计师，然后目前因为加拿大的原因，所以他现在就不叫 CA， 叫 CPA 了 ，Professional Accountant。然后他主攻的呢也是税务的问题，并且呢，他有很多的关于在这个慈善机构服务的这样的一个经历，也是关于税务相关的。然后呢，他之前呢做过3届的 Park Board， 也就是说在这个公园局里面担任过职务。在2014年的时候呢，因为他当时有2个孩子，那么大儿子呢是比较这个学习成绩比较好，然后现在是做工程师，但是他有个小儿子呢，他学习上有一定的障碍，所以他的小儿子有一个就是说阅读障碍，叫这样的，就是看着单词以后呢，没有办法从拼写中最后形成说这个单词是什么样的意思，所以他在这个时候呢就披挂上阵。2014年呢就不再选这个公园局，然后他就选了这个学校局，并且在当年当选之后，他也一直都是在这个学校局担任学校局主席。但是由于当时的这个政治情况呢，关于这个学校的这个关闭啊，预算的不足啊，所以呢他担任了这样的2年的职位啊。然后呢他在这个就是特别关注的就是特殊儿童的教育。然后他目前呢已经在学校 UBC 这个学校呢，他已经学习的是关于教育学的这个特殊教育的这个硕士学位，正在这个攻读之中啊。所以呢他在这个目前的情况之下，他有很多的这样的希望是通过2022年的选举呢，帮助到很多这个弱势的学生们如何在学校局中间也能够非常好的成长是这样的一个这个初衷。那同时呢，他有近50年的就关于在温哥华市警察局的这样的一个服务，就是这个在重大活动中间，交通管制的过程中间，你们都可以看到李继富先生的身影，然后常常出现在大街小巷，这个也为此登过报纸。然后在报纸上，这个温哥华的警察局的局长也说，他从19岁1983年进入警局到120这个多少年之后，几十年后，他担任到温哥华警察局局长，他整个职业生涯，他认识谁就是认识李继富先生。他因为李继富先生一直除了自己的专业工作之外，都长期致力于服务社区。So thank you, Ms. Richardson. I think it's a fascinating background and story. So let's talk about your these school matters and school board policies and related. So currently, I think school safety is one of the issues. So what do you think, and what's your perspective on this matter?
Well, you need a safe environment in life, the community, and that is an issue that is facing many aspects of the community. School safety is one of those things, and we have been lucky that we have escaped some of the tragedies that other jurisdictions have had. But I believe that it's appropriate that we have a proactive approach. And Vancouver was on the leading edge in many policing interventions, and one was the school liaison officer program. What we need is a system that the schools are safe from a seismic perspective, so that they're not going to fall down in an earthquake. And that's something we can talk about because that's been controversial in terms of right-sizing the system. But in terms of physical safety and comfort, well-being of the students, I have proposed, and a number of people have suggested, that we re-examine a decision that was made several years ago by the board to discontinue a program which had not had any issues in Vancouver. So we need a made in Vancouver solution to the school liaison officer program. And that would be probably a modified program somewhat. In the interim, the school board has introduced a safe and caring department within the school board, liaising with agencies, liaising with counselors, and dealing with issues. But I think that I've heard door knocking and on the street almost a unanimous desire that we bring back. And we have to be careful because what was identified that there are some students, some members of the school population that feel that there are some tensions or some trauma that has to be addressed. And that most certainly has to be addressed in a sensitive manner, because by removing a police officer from a school doesn't remove them from the community in which that child or that individual exists. So I think that that's one item that I think will be sensitive, and we have to be without a preconceived notion. I think we should consult with the Vancouver Police Department and return a program that has served us well since, I believe, the early 70s. So in terms of safety, there's a whole lot of aspects in terms of safety and well-being. And I think that we, as issues come up, we have to address them.
What's the rationale behind that cutoff of this school liaison, that kind of officer position? Is it just budgetary, or is there other reasons?
Well, it's not budgetary at the moment because the police department was part of their budget. So the 15 officers, the 2 non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, the equipment, that was provided by the police department as part of a proactive approach to issues. And I think, we in education and in healthcare, there is a comment called wait to fail. That one approach is that you wait till things are tragically failing and then you try to intervene. But by then you're dealing with it's very much, and we can talk. One of my passions is the dealing with special needs students. But I think it was caught up in the time of George Floyd and issues that were happening elsewhere in North America. So that's where I think a made in Vancouver solution, given the very positive relationship generally that the department had with the community, would be appropriate, and a solution elsewhere doesn't necessarily apply to Vancouver. So I respect the fact that there was a decision, and I think that upon reflection and upon the comments that I've received, that we should re-examine it. And I think that that's something that, along with all the other things we'll be dealing with, that's what we need to do.
Sure. So I'm not saying you said, but I mean, my understanding is it's a little bit like politically driven, and however, it actually penalizes the Vancouver students, because without this liaison person, actually, it compromises the school safety and also compromises the studying, like learning environment. So as you said, we should recognize these police issues. However, meanwhile, we should focus on Vancouver. It's a local issue, and let's solve it, and based on the local context. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So interesting, because you mentioned that you have this passion on special needs and special students, right? And also on the other side of the balance, we have the so-called honors classes, right? And to promote excellence in the classroom. How do we balance from excellence and also to make sure everyone has a chance, every student can thrive?
Exactly. And I think it is, and I think we approach that by accepting the fact that the new curriculum isn't memorizing facts, it's how to get the answer. So that's a new curriculum that has been brought in, and that suggests that we need to individualize the learning of all students. And we should be catering to their needs, their strengths, and be aware of their weaknesses and deficiencies that we must address. And so the term equity has been drawn into the discussion as as another, in terms of inclusive education. And some would interpret that some of the programs that are offered are somewhat elitist and exceptional, but it depends on the student. And I think that when we talk about special needs, carefully, not to stigmatize any child, but we're trying to understand what they're all about, is that there are programs that students just want to excel. They want to get ahead. And that may be preparing them for post grade 12 education. But there seems to have been a kind of a falling off of some of these honors classes and AP classes. And we've got to look at the student, a student who isn't being challenged. We run the risk that we may not give them the opportunity educationally, academically, and that they then have social and emotional issues. I think the concern is if we kind of segregate, and there's, the looking at the work of Shelley Moore, a local educator, that looks at, we're not secluding, or we want to have integration, and we want to have students. So it may very well be that some of their experiences will be amongst their peers, using, in subjects that I can't even comprehend. And so I think what we need to do is get a balance there and not disadvantage those certain aspects of students. We have to cater to the individualized needs of all students. And I think that will bring success, but appreciating that we avoid segregation, avoid that separation, because I think that, in terms of social emotional, there is a feeling that neurodiverse and neurotypical students do better, although there may be some that concerned that their child will be held up by the influence and of students that are struggling. But I think we have to have a mix and match of courses and environments to allow the social emotional learning as well and development, as well as the academic.
Sure. I think it's very heartening actually in Vancouver to basically see that, school board and schools can accommodate, students with special needs and make sure they are not left behind. So how is the current status quo of the special needs program? Like what are needed actually to support students? And I believe there's always a need, and so how behind are we for the moment, based on your information?
Yeah, from my opinion, and I'm a chartered accountant who's kind of been drawn into this. From my observation and the courses I've taken, is that we have some work to do, but that isn't to say that the system. Presently, I think in Vancouver, we have a wonderful system. We have caring teachers, caring support staff, caring administrators, and caring trustees. But there is a concept that has been talked about for 40 years, inclusive education. There was a United Nations UNESCO conference, the Salamanca Agreement in I believe it was 1996. So we're struggling. And that's inclusive in the sense that all students be in the same classroom. And that's one that requires a mindset of the teachers, and an educational system at universities that provide teacher preparation to provide the tools and the concepts to allow the teachers to comfortably. We had the class size and composition court cases that we brought in some more resources, but there is a severe teacher shortage. There's shortages of various expert and dedicated teachers in specific fields. So I think that what we need to do, if we've been talking about inclusive education, let's walk the talk, and let's gradually, and we have, and I believe the department's, the board has been working towards that, and I'd like to see that. In the end, I think it's more efficient, but I think there is some hesitation, and it isn't something that's going to be introduced overnight.
Right.
And that's kind of the push in rather than the pull out model, so that the assistance isn't directed to an individual student. It's assistance to the classroom, and everyone is learning in the same environment. But that will take us to convince those parents that think that their child will be held back. But on the other side of it, it will ensure that those students who may not now be attending public school or attending in an inclusive classroom, they feel that their needs will be taken care of, and we won't have what we have now is exclusion. When a teacher is away, then a prep teacher or a resource teacher may fill in, and then that student who needs that one-on-one tier 3 support may in fact be left at home or sent home early, and frankly, that isn't the inclusion that I would imagine that we should be offering.
Right. And in terms of teachers, and then as British Columbia government opens the door for nurses, right? And so that overseas educated nurses can become not immediately, but I mean, just make it smoother for them to become local nurses. So for teachers, is there a way to open up the gate? Is that a more provincial matter, or there's something on the school board level that you can increase the supply of educators?
As I understand it, and I look forward to the advice of our able staff, administrators, to advise me. But the school board has, in fact, and it's almost a domino effect, because they're with the Ministry of Education taking on childcare, or I would like to suggest that it should be taking on early childhood education. Right. We have shortages in that field as we try to provide to deal with the shortages in terms of childcare. Yeah. So we have teachers. We have the concern is that the local school boards, I think, can work with educational institutions to try to expand the number of seats and the number of teachers. But in the short term, this was a matter which, outside of the Lower Mainland, there are exemptions. The teachers, I believe it's called the Teacher Registration Branch, can offer exemptions where a person who lacks all the credentials of a teacher can be, in fact, qualified for a specific period of time to meet a specific need. And that was drawn to my attention by a teacher recently, that in the 60s we had a shortage. So what they did is they basically provided 1, 2, 3-year exemptions where you were they identified the needs, the courses you were short, and then along with educational institutions, UBC, SFU, Trinity Western, various institutions that provide the courses, to provide a avenue to pick up those courses. And so what you do is you don't leave the classroom empty or the classroom with a teacher who's just there temporarily, but you under mentorship and support and observation, that we can meet the needs. And it is cyclical. I mean, right now, a teacher spends 13 weeks in training, 3 of which is in the community, which was a recognition that 10 or 12 years ago, we had a surplus of teachers, and they were concerned about, so we sent them into the community to try to find jobs so they wouldn't be unemployed. That has reversed. And why not those teachers spend that 3 week of their 13 weeks in maybe a special needs environment where they can get exposed to and identify their needs to develop in terms of professional development. So I think there are some things, and these are specific needs that I'm going to focus on while I'm doing the job of a trustee, because there's many other mundane activities that a trustee must undertake. But I think that if we get the special needs, vulnerable student, Indigenous learners, yes, children in care, the new Canadians and the special needs, the exceptionality students, as well as the learning different students, if we can resolve that, I think we'll go a long way to having a much better and more inclusive education system for all children.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll do a little bit of interpretation in Chinese so people have a better understanding about the local, very British Columbian kind of a Vancouver issue about shortage of teachers. 所以刚才李继富先生有讲到是说这个老师的短缺的问题，那我就特意问了一下，就是说教师短缺的这个问题如何解决？是不是像 BC 省的省政府一样，那么可以使得在海外受教育的这个护理人员或者是护士能够在本地执业？那么刚才李继富先生回答的是说，这个呢也是个周期性的，然后历史上也发生过1960年的时代的时候呢，也发生过温哥华的教师短缺。然后呢，现在的问题是说，现在已经有一些这样的这个现存的机制是可以解决短时间解决，那么有一些没有符合完整的这个要求的一些有愿意从事教师工作的这个人呢，是可以获得一些豁免，在这个豁免的期间呢，能够在短期之内担任某些学科的老师，从而呢填补这样的空缺。当然，从长期来讲，过往呢有过这样的，就是说可以豁免1年啊、2年啊、3年啊，那么在用这样的一种机制呢来做到一个平衡。So, Mr. Richardson, and you were in chartered accountants. So, can you give us a little bit like a overview about the current school board? Like how many, what's the budget, and not on a very detailed budgetary items, but just the general speaking, just the budget, number of schools, and how many like the size of the staff in terms of school district. And how many trustees, and also, are we actually running kind of short of students, or because the affordability matter, do we see the trend that Vancouver is actually losing kind of students to other cities because people are moving out from Vancouver to like Burnaby, Tri-Cities, and other Lower Mainland areas?
Okay, so that Vancouver is governed, co-governed. So there is a system that the provincial government co-governs the Vancouver students with the 9 trustees that are elected. Now, co-governance is interesting when one person has the purse strings and we have to implement. So that's an interesting, there's a little bit of tension. And that's both an operating budget, per student funding, and then that's supplemented with funding that is specifically targeted at unique aspects of the student population. There are about 50,000 students, and that's down from a peak population in the range of about 60,000. Vancouver is the second largest school district. Surrey is in fact bigger, which makes some sense in terms of its expansion. The budget is about $500 million. From an operating standpoint, and one point to be aware of, it must be balanced. So funding is equalized, I think, is the way we would look at it. Unlike the past 20 or so years ago, where the individual school districts could assess different mill rates to address. So you had inequities between certain school districts, of which there are 60 in the province. So Vancouver has 120 schools. We have 18 high schools, and we have something like, it's called a family of schools. We're a high school. We have, and there's a boundary map I've got here that kind of shows where you live, then where do you likely to go. We used to have a lot of focus on the neighborhood because most of the programs were available. You attended your neighborhood school. Unfortunately, there is a several billion-dollar capital program, and that was really kicked off. We had schools that were built in the teens in the 1920s. And then we had, after the war, a baby boom, and a lot of annexes and a lot of additions were put on schools. And so we used to have junior high schools and senior high schools. So if you look, as I do as a student, at kind of the history of the system, things that look interesting, it kind of makes sense. But we had it at the turn, in 2000 or so, actually Gordon Campbell stepped forward and said, we're in a seismic zone. These schools were expected to last 40 or 50 years. They're approaching 80 or 90 years. So he promised to have a total revamp, rebuilding or reinforcing schools that was going to be done by 2020. And of course, in 2014, when I got elected, I said, we've got a lot more work to do. And then we punted that deadline down the road to 2030. And now the provincial government has been stalling in the sense that they said we have to right size the system. The schools are not where today's population are. So we have shortages. University of British Columbia, we're looking at a new school there, and those students are forced off of campus. We have around False Creek on the south side, students who can, see a school but have to go 1 or 2 schools down the way. And then we have the same problem because, of course, no one lived. You didn't have a family in Vancouver South or in downtown South. So you have many people overlooking David Lamb Park, but they have to go to schools 1 or 2 school catchments away. So very briefly, I mean, we've got challenges. And a lot of the challenges, the solution is convincing the government of whatever stripe that we need the monies so that we can return to a neighborhood approach, and that we have to be, and that's, I'm fully aware as a chartered accountant, or as a CPA, I should correct myself because we changed that name about 7 years ago, but we have to be responsible. The provincial government, there isn't a bottomless pit of money. The opioid crisis, the healthcare crisis, COVID, housing, healthcare, all those things are competing for the same scarce dollars. And I'm aware of that. But I am aware that if you don't pay me now, and that student isn't educated and isn't learning to read and write and understand math, and we push them out of the system functionally illiterate, then they become they struggle, the family struggles, and the community struggles. So pay me now or pay me a lot more later. And so I think that, that's a brief summary of, I think the school, in terms of staff, the number 5,000 rings a bell, but we are a very substantial employer in the city of Vancouver, and we have to retain, because as you mentioned, the cost of living, it's both our student population it's impacting, but Vancouver is expected to increase in population. The question is will that be a population that has school-age children? And there are some examples. Certainly the Sanak redevelopment at Burrard Street on the south side, that may impact. And so our administrators have to be aware of what's happening today. And also we have, and that will be one of the big issues, is what do we do with surplus lands? Because frankly, they're, and is it trading lands or is it furloughing lands? I mean, the parks, if we're not having adequate park space, maybe it's a joint venture with the park board to kind of furlough those parks, those school spaces, so that if we need them for enrolling spaces 50 years from now, they will be available.
Yes, and then so is resource actually assigned based on individual students, like the number of students from the east side, and also Vancouver is, whole Vancouver basically is divided by the west side of Vancouver. I mean, just geographically speaking, there's a west side of Vancouver and the east side of Vancouver, and so the resources are equally kind of assigned based on the number of students in a school. Is that right? Or it's based on the needs, because the needs can be different, right? So you have a fairly affluent community on the west side, and you have the east side. I think these students, they also equally, they need probably more support.
It is, and there's always been, I mean, Vancouver, we used to talk that there was kind of a dividing line on Main Street, north-south. And then we kind of shifted it over, and it was down Kingsway, and then, of course, Champlain Heights.
Yeah,
I think that the department or the school board has attempted to realize that there may be inequities, and it is. And I turn to Clyde Hertzman's work that I was mesmerized by. It's the late Clyde Hertzman. he talked about the determinants of health. What makes a person, a community healthy? And so that means that in many cases, the school board has to provide additional supports. There was a feeling, it was about 2002, that we kind of took down the barriers and we said, you don't have to go. You can go to Burnaby if you'd like to, or if you can go across town. That's created, I think we should try wherever possible. Any specialty program should be within that high school family of schools, so that we're keeping, and the last figure I heard was that 30% of students were out of catchment. Well, environmentally, if we have to take our child and drive them to school,
right.
if there's environmental impacts, it's impact on our roads, impact upon climate change, our climate impacts. I think at every turn, we should be trying to get back so that there is, and some of that's perception. I know when I was traveling, there are perceptions that certain high schools, certain schools are better than others. But, frankly, some of those I think may be urban myths. We look at Britannia, where my parents attended.
Yeah.
It's a baccalaureate school. I mean, it provides those. So I think we have to strive to ensure that we're addressing the inequities,
yes.
And then we're selling, or we're communicating that stay put in your community. There's always greener pasture over our shoulders. We always look, but I think some of the, when my son was doing robotics, and Kitsilano but it was David Thompson that was the rival. So, right. There are, and I think we have to celebrate those excellent programs throughout the system. And if we do perceive that people are, streaming into one area to try to achieve a better education for their child, and that's what parents do. I mean, we should accept that, but we should try to be dealing with that so that people aren't thinking that they have to go out of their way to get an equal or an equitable educational experience for their child.
And within the catchment, and I think that's a very interesting perspective and then insight. Basically, you have young students, generally speaking, relatively speaking, and then with very large footprints, right? Mm-hmm. And so the carbon footage. So it's an interesting contrast, right? And very young, but actually they talk about climate change, and then they are taught climate change all the time. But let me do the interpretation a little bit so that they have a better idea about the Vancouver School Board and how complicated some of the issues or challenges are. 整个温哥华的这个学校局呢，有差不多120多所的学校，然后呢有10几所的这个中学，然后每年呢大概的这个预算呢大概在5个亿，就是这个一半的这个10亿啊，$500 million 这样的5个亿的这样的一个上下。那么目前的学生呢大概在5万到6万这样的变化中间，大概有5000多个这样的员工。那个学校局呢也是这个整个的一个很大的一个雇佣的，应该叫雇主，因为他雇佣了下面的很多的这个教师啊，然后也是除了教师以外还有很多的这个其他的学校局的工作人员。那么现在呢我继续想问一下李继富先生呢，是关于这个一些其他的关于学校的教育的课程的事情。So, Mr. Richardson, you were a chartered accountant CPA, and then we're talking about these, music, arts programs, and also talking about individualized learning, and in terms they learn how to code, and also financial, legitimacy. Literacy. Yes, literacy. And then so just from your professional kind of a perspective, and how the school board and how much the school board can do to actually pave the way for the future generations, and to help them to cope with these new skills.
I think we have to be realistic that just adding and being able to add and subtract and to read, we have to look at the content. And that content, and I appreciate the parental responsibility for certain development of children, but I think we things like just basic issues of financial literacy. I would actually suggest maybe philanthropic literacy, to be aware that we can help our causes that are important to us. I think that schools can, as part of the curriculum, provide those skills.
Yes.
And we have used the word life skills in terms of special needs situations, but there are lots of things that we need, that not all children may in fact be exposed to in their real life as they're growing up. And so I think those are good points to speak to, is that there may in fact be things like financial literacy that are things that you would hope that someone would pick up on. So let's have that. And I know when I was a student, we had some very practical courses. I mean, you did a little bit of woodworking, you did a little bit of typing, you did a little bit of home ec. Those are skills that frankly maybe you didn't need necessarily, but they made you a more rounded person. And they were, I mean, when you needed to darn a stock, it was kind of nice to kind of have had been exposed to it. You may not have spent a lot of time in it. So I think that we should be looking at those useful skills. And I think that's what a school board can do. I mean, the school board along the way, I mean, Vancouver doesn't have to only offer those courses that are offered to all the students in the province. There are cases that courses astronomy, that some language courses, some of the language courses have been in fact introduced because there's a need. And so I think we listen for those identified needs and then see how we can address them. Many times there are resources outside, and one of my pillars, my 8 pillars, is partnerships, is that we don't have to rediscover the wheel at the board, and nor should we, because there are outside agencies, Junior Achievement and others, that have those canned packages in terms of we would have to review them and ensure that they meet our curriculum standards. But there is no reason why we can't partner, in terms of before school and after school care. We should be partnering with those agencies that are present, that kind of have compatible offerings for us as a student at all ages. Is it one-to-one literacy that offers opportunities for children that may not have that opportunity to be read to or by their parents? We can provide that with those outside agencies that are critical in terms of that village developing the child.
Yes. Okay, so my next question is, let's get back to the civic election, this particular election on October 15th. So you, Li Ji Fu, Christopher Richardson, you're the number 1 on the ballot. Is that right?
Well, I think the city or the election clerk tried to not have any number 1,
okay,
because that may be favoritism. I am actually 300, which so each of the ballots. The mayor, Ken Sim, of course, is, it started off at 50, and right. He is in, number 63, and I am actually 300. But right. There are 31 candidates, and right. Yes, I have the advantage. Never in my political career have I ever been at the top of the ballot.
Okay, so the ballots are already printed, they're ready, right? So because they talk about randomized the order, so that one is already they've done that, and so now according to the order, even though your number is 300, but you still rank as the first place on the ballot, on the ballot. So let me do the interpretation in Chinese. 所以李继福先生呢，这次选举的时候呢，他虽然这个学校局呢也好，是选举的过程中间呢，每个参选人都会有一个不同的号码，然后他的号码是300号，但是呢，他在学校局的31位的候选人中间呢，他是在这个选票的第1位，这个也是非常有意思。他说第一次他有了这样的一个这个还是一个优势了，就是在选票上面在最靠前的这样的一个位置。Mr. Richardson, so we have a few minutes left, and then just tell the audience in Vancouver, these voters in Vancouver, why you can contribute to the school board, and tell us, your concluding remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Yan. As a parent, and as a parent of a student who actually now is a teacher, but that was a student who had been was unable to get the services he required, the assistance he got. We actually had to go outside this public school system, and I did that because we didn't have a choice. But not all parents have that option to go to an essential school and get that support. So in my case, I would suggest that I have, given my financial fiscal balance background, my fundraising background, which it may be an avenue that the board wishes to address to address those shortfalls of funding. And so I have the passion and the interest, and given my my courses that I'm hoping that early in 2024 I will finish my master's. But I think that there are many worthy candidates. Of the 31 candidates, there's a great spectrum of people that they should go to plan my vote on the city's website. But I would suggest that at the top of the ballot is a candidate, myself, who has lived experiences, has been involved in the community, and can bring those experiences and that knowledge to the board table, because there is work to be done. We have a great system as it exists, but it can always be better so that we leave no child behind.
So the school board has 8 counselors, right?
Pardon me?
There are 8 school board trustees, right?
There are 9.
9.
Yeah. And so I think that there are 9 positions. This is a very pivotal election because there are only 4 trustees that are running for re-election.
Wow.
So, okay. Normally there's a little bit of turnover. I think this is a critical election because there will be a great number of either new faces or faces that have been in various capacities around that board table who are coming back. And so I think it is that the voters should be looking, and they've got an opportunity. Advance polls coming up, 3 more of them before Election Day, which is Saturday, October the 15th.
Yeah. Okay. So 李继富先生呢，刚才提到了这次选举呢是要选出9位的这个学校局的这个委员，那么学校局的委员叫 trustee， 那么这个中间呢只有4位是争取连任，所以今年的换届呢变得非常的重要，所以有5个位置呢是空缺出来，重新要选举，所以呢这个李继富先生根据自己的这个常年的财务背景，同时呢他觉得他可以在这个资源分配啊，然后从财务的角度能够起到一些贡献，同时他还有这个筹款的能力，那么相信这个也是学校局呢在这方面所需要的。因此呢，这个感谢今天李继富先生的这个访谈啊，祝李继富先生呢这个选举顺利。So Mr. Richardson, thank you very much for your time and also your insights and to share with the audience and with us. And we wish you all the best and also the best luck.
Thank you so much. 谢谢。
谢谢。Okay, thank you.
Thank you.